Lance,
What up,
what's going on?
dude? What is the life right now, bro?
We are on a Friday, headed into the weekend, but we wanted to do another quick intro to our upcoming episode.
Yeah, I thought it'd be fun to. Number one, I love the episode, like the moment before the episode starts, keeps people excited.
Can you feel their anticipation coming
Like,
through the microphone?
yeah, they're like, oh, something's happening today.
Yeah, so share why you, especially on this podcast, you thought it was important.
Well, number one, we love David Taylor. He's an RT therapist and doesn't know it yet.
That is true.
I think this is a great episode for people that like to integrate their faith with therapy. So we wanted to kind of set this episode up for those of you that are excited about integrating faith with therapy. This is a great kind of thoughtful way. As you listen to David Taylor, you'll notice that I don't know how you got this guy. He's pretty amazing. Like, what do you like? It was a great episode, don't you think?
I just, David Taylor, as you'll find out soon, is a theologian and professor at Fuller Seminary who lives in Texas.
Yeah.
And he's done some amazing work, which we'll get into in the episode. But I'm like, I'll just send him an email. And he responded and said, awesome, sounds great. And I was intrigued by his previous work and the work he's doing now. And what really caught my attention was a workshop he was leading using the Psalms to help adolescents access their emotions.
Yeah.
And his book, Body of Praise, it really is about embodied worship. And he talks a lot about training to be a dancer and getting in your body. And I thought as therapists, Terry's always trying to tell us to get up, right? And move our body. And it's hard for a lot of us, not so much for you. So I wanted to just, have him on to talk through some things. And unfortunately, we could only go about an hour because of you and I's schedules. But yeah. I could sit down with him easily for 3 hours and just pick his brain on all the intersection of things that were coming up.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a great episode. We definitely want to recommend. I don't think we actually got to name the books that well. You just mentioned Body of Praise. Other ones, Open and Unafraid, a book, How the Psalms is a Guide to Life. Such great books.
He's got some other great ones too. Yeah. On Instagram, he's been posting a lot of his prayers from his book, Prayers for the Pilgrimage. And I found that to be like really helpful too. And the book is accompanied by paintings from his wife. So it's pretty
sweet.
Dude,
Homeboy is awesome.
Yeah.
I love this guy.
And
yeah.
Oh.
No, you go.
I saw on his Instagram story today, he's reading a book that you and I are both reading and in love with. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. Liturgies of the Wild by Martin Shaw. Myths that make us. Sometimes I'll plow through books. This is the book that I leave on a coffee table and I pick up and read when I want to sit and savor it and just take it in. Cause you can't rush through this book. You got to sit.
No.
You gotta, the book is like shaping me. So there's a lot of connections in terms of interest with David Taylor. So yeah, excited to have him on, and he doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to invite myself down to his homestead maybe someday in Texas so I can meet him in person.
Yeah. And we're actually recording on his birthday today.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, David.
Happy birthday.
Or Dr. Taylor, although...
Dr. Taylor. I know, we're so informal with this established Regents Seminary. Like, he's brilliant. So, but he's just one of those guys. He's an awesome guy. You're going to love it.
And, like I said, and you had said earlier, if you're really into integration, this is going to be awesome. And we could have gone way deeper with it, and we will at another episode. And if that's not your jam, or, you're an RT therapist who wouldn't consider themselves a Christian or practicing a particular faith, I think there's a lot to learn from it as well. Yeah. So,
I mean, we get to talk about Bono, Eugene Peterson. Yeah. I mean, come on, bro. It's a good episode. But, if that ain't your shtick, if that ain't your flow, it's all good. You don't have to listen to this episode.
Well, episode 70. Tune in, people.
Enjoy.
Take care. See you, Lance.
Cheers.
Lance, how's it going today?
Dude, I am so stoked today.
Episode 70, can you believe it?
Nope. I thought we'd make it to 10.
I'm pretty sure Terry and Sharon thought when we started starting a podcast that we'd be done about 5, but we're cruising along.
Good idea, boys.
Yeah, totally. All right, we're going to skip our normal announcements because we have a special guest on today.
Totally.
And you and I have done a lot of research on him, so I feel a little overwhelmed in the proper introduction. But I would say he came onto my radar about 10 years ago with the documentary that he was the director of between Bono and Eugene Peterson. And you and I love Eugene Peterson. As former pastors, we read everything. And then I'd say in the last few years, just been following him on Instagram and appreciate the prayers he posts, especially when life is difficult. And the prayer each day seems to be appropriate. I love his book reviews. In fact, last week I was showing the book review by, is it Susanna Clarke, Piranesi? I was showing that review to my wife and daughter and some other people because they were interested in reading that book. So I'm like, this is a perfect book review. And
it's like it's a full body experience.
Yeah. And then he lives in Texas, and I feel like he's homesteading a little bit on the land, hands in the dirt. You and I, our favorite mentor at Fuller was Dr. Ray Anderson, or one of them.
Yeah.
And he talks about, remember in his book, how his father told him to put his hands in the soil and to take care of the soil, and it'll take care of you. And so, I don't know, I had that very earthy stuff. So he's also a professor at Fuller Seminary. Actually, I should say the correct title, Associate Professor of Theology and Culture, author of Body of Praise, Open and Afraid, and other books. And I'm going to try out another introduction. Yo vivo en Guatemala 25 años pasado. Yo estudio español en la ciudad Antigua para 3 meses. Okay, that's all I got of my Spanish. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. David Taylor.
That's good.
I just want you to know I am laughing with lots of love in my heart. Hey, you know what this podcast episode should be called? It should be called the Septuagint episode because it's 70, right? The Septuagint was the Greek version of the Bible that was written in the intertestamental period. It was written allegedly by 70 authors. So this is the 70th episode.
I like it.
This is the Septuagint episode.
All right.
That's a deep cut.
Hey, you just gave me my title. People would do that. I love it.
Oh, goodness. It's nice to be with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I don't know. We were like, where do we want to start? So we're just going to start with Bono and Eugene Peterson. And, we've watched the documentary many times.
Yeah.
And, I see what I see on the screen, but I guess I'm wondering if there is a story that you're able to share that was really impactful for you in filming, in your experience with both those guys or one of those guys in particular.
Yeah. I've written about the whole experience in various places. So if you just Google, the thing, there'll be a number of interviews or conversations just to explain maybe how it all came about. But to answer your question, this would come as no surprise to people that knew Eugene and Jan. They were very modest, unassuming, in the wonderful sense of the term, simple people. They were not complicated. They were not sophisticated. They were not impressed with themselves. And And I mean, I think you see this in the biography that Win Collier wrote about him, that things were not always easy in their marriage. And there's like a little glimpse of this in the time together. I had him as a professor when I was at Regent College in the 90s. So I got to know him and Jan a bit, during those years. But certainly in their home space, they were just very sweet and kind and simple and delightful. And they were just as excited for Bono to come to their home as we were, to meet him. And so that was just really kind of sweet to see. And then similarly, or maybe conversely, it was interesting to see how gentle and kind and unassuming Bono himself was when he came into their home. In a way, he felt, at least as I perceived him, a little bit self-conscious. And I think he tried to make himself as small as the house itself. Like, he did not seek to enlarge or amplify his personality in any way. I would say a couple of things that really have stayed with me to this day. There were a friend of mine was the film director, and he brought it was a crew of 5 guys that came to film it. Wonderful, immensely talented guys. And when Bono came, when he first arrived, he greeted Eugene and Jan first, and then said hi to me, said hi to my wife Phaedra, and then introduced himself to all 5 of the film crew. But what impressed me was at the end of the 3 hours that we spent together, well, at least that he was there, when he said goodbye to everybody, he remembered all the guys' names. And I thought, that's impressive. I have a hard time remembering people's names, even after I've learned them multiple times. But I thought, that's the mark of somebody who really cares about each individual person. And he's a gift giver. And so when he came, he gave Eugene and Jan a copy of Seamus Heaney's poems. He's a very famous Irish poet. And so it's like all these little things that you observe, and you think to yourself, oh, these are all signs of the kind of person he is at all times. And this is probably why he has been faithfully married to his wife for, over 40 years. And while he has retained his friendships with the other bandmates, because there's an integrity to him. There's a trueness to his character. And I mean, the only other thing I'll say, I've said this before, and I feel a little bit self-conscious maybe saying it, but I don't think he would mind terribly much. But it was filmed in the spring of 2015, and then it released the spring of 2016. Mm-hmm. And then that was the year that you two did their Joshua Tree, not reunion tour, but their 40 year, Josh, it would be 40 years, right? That since they released the Joshua Tree in 86, I think that's what it was, right? Wow. So they're 30
years.
Joshua Tree Redux or something like that. And I went to their performance of it in Houston, and had a chance to hang out with him afterwards. And we chatted about a number of things. And then at one point he asked me in a kind of a funny little cheeky way, do you want to know why I asked you, David, whether I could have 1 hour with Jan and Eugene before I got on camera with you when I was at their home in Lakeside, Montana in April of 2015? And I said, I would love to know, because that was the condition, that he would have 1 hour with Eugene and Jan before he was on camera. And I was, of course, very happy for him to have that time. I didn't know why until a year later. And he said, well, every once in a while, I do feel a need to confess my sins, and I felt that they were the kind of people that I could do that with safely. And I thought, that's wonderful. I'm really, really glad to hear that that was something you wanted to do, and there's something that you had a chance to do. And again, just he's such an unusual human being, right? Yes. And he's very powerful and famous and popular, but there's a sense in which he has figured out a way to stay grounded. And that is something that I find very impressive.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. Kind of gives me chills there hearing that.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of therapy, you guys are therapists. I was going to say my connection to the world of therapy is that I started my first therapy session was in the spring of 1993. And I had known a few people, not many, because counseling therapy was still, I think, something that a lot of folks in my circles felt embarrassed or ashamed, or like only really, really, truly broken, messed up people need therapy, not normally broken people. But I had read this novel by a British author named Susan Howatch called Glittering Images.
Oh yes,
and reading a work of fiction changed my mind and really my sort of heart, from being resistant to it to being sort of desperate to be able to disclose, or to just fully disclose things that were buried deep inside to somebody else. And so that was the beginning of sort of a journey of counseling / therapy, and I'm grateful for the gift of a novelist to help sort of shift me to imagine that this was not undesirable or improbable, but fully desirable and good. So artists, we thank God for them.
Dude,
here's my own confession. I have read the Starbridge series, that one in particular, the 7 books. I've read them 12 times.
That is a lot.
Just in a sequential order over the last, I don't know, 28 years.
Wow.
And on every reading, I learn something new and something changes. And
wow, that's amazing.
I believe it was a professor at Fuller. I'm blanking on his name. I think he required the absolute truths. Is that the one?
Okay. That would be, I think, the third one, because there's Glittering Images, Glamorous Powers.
I should know. There you go. He required it reading in a class at Fuller, and now I kind of know why after. So
I don't think I have thought to myself that I would love to assign that, but because it has so much intimate scenes, I don't think I can do that. Unfortunately, I understand the reasons why, but I think it would, not be well received. But I wish I could, because it is so powerful.
It's the clear look at the struggles that people face, and people in ministry and pastoral callings, and the beautiful interactions between a spiritual director and this pastor. And you referenced Win Collier's book on Eugene, and for some reason that was really helpful for me to read, to realize his own marriage, they had their own struggles, and it gave me permission to be like, oh, that's okay. Like, marriage can have its difficulties and struggles, and and there was to kind of peel that layer back was, I don't know. Yeah, I even liked Eugene even more, I think, after reading that.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Which I think one of the things that I've really dug about getting into, you, David, I'm late on the scene, for the record, of the amazingness of DT. Rhett got me into you just about, probably was it about 6 months ago, last year? You're sending me these crazy Instagrams of this guy. You're like, dude, you got to get into David. We got to get him. This guy is so amazing. So I'm like, I'll read him, because Rhett always has good recommendations. But I really do appreciate your, the vulnerability that you bring to life. And the way that you offer us a new view of how to use our bodies, understanding the importance of embodiment. And I think this other element of, how to engage truthfully with life, and I think that's something that I think there's probably a lot of through lines that you bring out I noticed like using the way, or also just being real. And I was really touched, even just thinking about like this season for you is such a crazy season that we're in now. Happy early birthday, by the way.
Wait, how do you know it's my birthday?
I read your books, bro.
Oh, okay.
April 17th, right?
No, it is April 17th. I'm very excited. My wife asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I told her I wanted some crepe myrtles, maybe an oak tree, and some stones that we could lay, because we have these 21 acres. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing together as a family for my birthday. It's planting.
I love it.
But yeah, I was kind of leaning into this whole idea of like the from a therapeutic perspective about how this idea in and around confession, being real, open, and finding our humanity again, whether it's with our inviting our full bodies into it, or even just joining in the corporate nature. And I was curious for you, try and put together this like, what do you think is like to help our brothers and sisters? I think about like what helps people to lean into that more. I mean, you get this invitation from Eugene to just read the Psalms 1, 2, 3. But I'm curious, what are the things? You're so approachable. Yeah.
I mean, let's see. I'll say two things to that. I don't think I was raised in a family where appearances like mattered in a dysfunctional way. I think my father has always been real with me. And so I think close to home, I've had an example of somebody like a male figure, which I think is pretty powerful for folks like myself, to see somebody close in, be at ease admitting failure and asking for forgiveness. So I think that was very powerful for me as a child and a teenager. But I think my personality type has wanted to be perceived as capable, as somebody who can achieve things, who is productive, who is impressive. I always did relatively well in school. I was always relatively liked in school. And then all of that, if you're not careful, it does start sort of creating this facade of somebody who is not only capable one time, but indefinitely and perennially and always capable, who is a leader and therefore trustworthy, and you can look up to him, and these kinds of things into college. And so it was with the reading of Susan Howatch's novel that I sort of felt that permission not to have my act together all the time, not to be embarrassed or ashamed because I didn't have my act together all the time. And then it was in my 20s. I think it was in seminary, possibly one of Eugene Peterson's classes, that I read Frederick Buechner, who's the pastor novelist, and he has that trilogy of memoirs that he writes about his childhood and youth and how things were very broken and very dark in his own family, especially with his father. And I think there was something about how it was that Buechner narrated his life that gave me, again, an imagination for being in the world in a certain way, where that kind of vulnerability was a strength, not a deficit or a weakness or some kind of deficit that others would take advantage of, and therefore you should protect yourself at all costs. But that there was a true inner strength, and from that inner strength, outer strength, could then flow. And I remember Buechner saying in one of his books how by the age of 8 years old, every preacher would have a lifetime supply of stories to tell if you were honest enough.
Yeah,
and that had stayed with me. And I think that has actually always informed my preaching, that I've always wanted to be able to preach. Not obviously, there's always the risk of being exhibitionist or telling stories that are, TMI, too much information. Yeah. So you have to be wise and careful and prudent. But I think Buechner has served as a model for me as a preacher to be able to help people see how the grace of God shows up in my own sort of mixed stories that don't always land well, where I find myself wanting to tell stories where I'm not the hero in the story, because I feel like it is helpful for me to see how others, Buechner and others beyond him, to see how grace shows up in the hardest or the darkest places, because then that gives me hope to be able to perceive how in my own life, a great failure or a great sin or a great whatever, that the grace of God can show up in non-spectacular, non-dramatic ways, but very real ways. And so I've wanted to model that in my preaching, and I think I've tried to model that somewhat in my writing. Not like somewhat like I'm hiding, but like you just have to kind of figure out what that looks like in writing. And then in social media, to be able to be a source of hope, for people who do, live these lives of quiet desperation. So I think, it's accumulation, but probably like the through line is having a few people in my immediate worlds, and then having others like Buechner. And I would say Eugene is not somebody who self-disclosed readily. And I wondered about that when I was in seminary in conversation with him, and he never answered me that question. Like, why don't you share more of those stories? And it was over time that I maybe cobbled together some sense in which his childhood, growing up in sort of an extreme sensationalist Pentecostal kind of culture, church culture, where everything was on display, caused him to maybe overcorrect and to want to err on the side of not being that kind of person. But I think the memoir was certainly the place where I guess he gave Wynne Collier permission to tell those stories there at the end of the life. So all this to say, a combination of close people a little bit further, and then, fictional sources that have helped me that.
That's great. Going with Buechner, I always think about, that sermon of his from Lady Lodge, where he talks about being a steward of your pain. I think this thing, and this is something that for us as restoration therapists, we highly value, is how we can be stewards of pain. That the things that have been dealt to us, the things that have damaged us, like that, there's still a hope within that. So it's so great. And I really appreciate just the way that you bring it out throughout your works. I mean, it's so wonderful.
One of the things I was interested in, and if people are wondering why I was trying to speak Spanish, it's because you were born in Guatemala City.
I was.
And if, as I kind of get a sense of some of the stuff I read, I mean, you've pastored in, Canada and Germany and Mexico, and pastored in Austin, and you have spanned the gamut of theological ministries. I can't think of the right word at the moment, but like Episcopalian and Vineyard,
all the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah, all of it. And I guess I was wondering, I'm like, when you look back at that, was that a really intentional move on your part, or is that just kind of how life happened? And that is, obviously all that has come together to inform the work you do. But I was wondering if that was something that just kind of, happened to do, or you were very thoughtful, like, I want to do these things and move in these directions and try all this out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a combination of maybe personality, maybe I'm wired to want to enjoy sort of different spaces, different ecclesial homes, theological spaces. I would say probably my parents inculcating in us, I have two sisters, a love for the global church, sort of an expansive love for the body of Christ throughout space and time. The fact that I was raised a third culture kid meant that I was at home and not at home everywhere I found myself. And then my parents put me and my sisters in an Austrian school. So it was like another layer of differentness, otherness, in a wonderful way. So, we spoke English at home, Spanish with friends in church, and then German at school. And so from a very early age, like the little software that's running in my head is that belonging in multiple spaces is completely normal and completely desirable. Like it was really a formative and life-giving experience for me to be in multiple spaces. So then when I moved to the States when I was 13, well, it was a shock to the system. It was North Shore, Chicago. It was a very different world. But eventually in high school, I realized, I think I would love to be a diplomat, because then I could go back into that world and, be somebody that was living an amphibious life, going from one thing to the other. And that was not in the cards for me. God had other, purposes for me, but I think still, to this time, I find that I do have a calling and like an intrinsic joy to diplomatically shuttle between different spaces. So, from pastor world to artist world, from academic world to church world, from Christian to non-Christian, and, across the denominational spectrum. And I think that did govern a lot of how I conceived of my work as a pastor. I sort of had this philosophy of ministry that if there was one way in which I could partner with somebody else in the name of Jesus, on behalf of the grace of God, in service of the kingdom of God, I'm game. I don't have to agree, about everything. I don't have to like everything necessarily, but if there's one way in which we could partner in Jesus' name, then I'm willing to do that, because we live in a world that is so fractured and harried and, chaotic on account of the comprehensive systemic, effects of sin, that I figure good could come from us doing something together. So I think professionally, vocationally, personally, I am wired, but also called to do that kind of work.
So great.
It also prepares you for your doctoral dissertation, to know German and some other.
It did. I did. I took my exams in German. It was translating Bonhoeffer, actually, and I was like, yes.
You lucky dog.
So it was. I had to refresh myself because it's been quite a long time since I, read, but it was a lot of fun. So it was fun.
That's amazing. So something that popped up. It could have been like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. I saw on your Instagram this workshop, Emotional Vitality of Teens, using Psalms.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that, and also just your work, the body of praise and stuff. And I guess I was curious, and I was talking to Lance about it, because we try to live these embodied experiences to help people move out of their pain into their truth, to move from the old self to the new self in therapy.
Right.
And I guess I just wanted you to speak into that, like what you were doing at this workshop, especially around this idea of emotions and using the Psalms, because I think it's really important for the work that we are trying to do as therapists.
Yeah. So let's see, how did this thing come up? Let me see. Somebody invited me to do this. Oh, that's what it was. So I'm part of an Anglican Church of North America. So I'm part of an Anglican communion. And one of the ministries in sort of the national Anglican communion is geared towards children and youth. So high school all the way down to babies. And so they reached out to me and said, hey, look, we have these gatherings, I don't know, once a quarter or something like that. Would you be interested in sharing anything, right? And I know you do things on the Psalms, so maybe you could do something. And I said, okay, sure, let me think about it. So I thought about it, and I teach regularly in our children's ministry in our church. So I preach and I celebrate the Eucharist. I do those things, but I also serve in the children's ministry. I love it. I love kids. I think they're amazing, and it just gives me no end of joy to work in the children's ministry. And I often think to myself, because my day job is teaching theology to adults, I often wonder, well, how would I teach some of these things to kids, and not dumbing it down, but transposing it, into a different key. And I have had in the back burner of my mind some kind of curriculum that would invite children to experience, the goodness of the Psalms when it comes to emotional health, emotional intelligence, emotional vitality, emotional maturity, whatever you want to call it. And so I pitched that to them, and I said, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a presentation where I'm going to pitch this idea of like an 8-week curriculum on emotional vitality of children and youth through the Psalms. And so I had anger and sadness and jealousy and thanksgiving and happiness, and so a few others. And then I had a sample lesson on anxiety. So the anxiety is the emotion. And what I tell my students in my class, which I'm teaching it right now in spiritual formation through the Psalms, is that the well-being, the health, the vitality that the Psalms would invite us into is a holistic thing. So it's not a cognitive, mainly thing. We're not thinking thoughts and then we heal. It's like it's inviting our whole selves. And so in this curriculum, and I ended up focusing on like elementary age kids, because I realized teenagers have maybe specific needs that I would sort of think different things in service of that demographic. But I sort of imagined a lesson plan that involved things that they would do, let's say, on a Sunday morning, but also things that children and their parents would be invited to do all week long. Because as I tell my students in this class, that studying the Psalms is like studying basketball or snowboarding or ballroom dancing. It's not something you read in a book or watch on the YouTube. It's something that you inhabit, right? Your whole self, and you have to practice. So it was a bunch of people that were like children's ministers of one kind or another. And I said, look, the only way that this curriculum could succeed is if this curriculum invited kids and their parents, because it has to be an all hands on deck thing. You can't just tell the kids, here's the good news about being emotionally healthy when it comes to your anxieties, but your parents are emotionally stunted human beings and they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know how to help this 8-year-old kid who comes home and says, hey, look, I should feel free to tell you when I'm anxious and I'm feeling anxious and I'm having an explosive emotional moment. I need you to be regulated enough to receive me. And so I was sort of pitching this, comprehensive curriculum that would involve a holistic formation, because there's no way that 30 minutes or 45 minutes on a Sunday morning would result in much benefit when it comes to, like, say, anxiety. So how could this be like an 8-week, all week, but also ultimately I had sort of this idea of an intergenerational curriculum, because I think, man, I don't want kids to be the only emotionally healthy humans going to church. Like, you got to get everybody in on it. And so it was a lot of fun to dream up. It just so happened that somebody on the call works for David C. Cook, the publisher. And then she reached out and said, hey, could some of our staff meet with you over Zoom? And like you said, wouldn't it be fun if this existed? Well, we'd like to ask that question. What would it take for it to exist? But the long and short of it, sort of for our purposes here, was that I sort of had imagined this curriculum that would involve things that we think, things that we say, things that we allow ourselves to feel, and things that we do, and things that we do relationally. So that there would be a sense in which I have learned things I've learned about how I should think about anxiety and how the Psalms might help me to bring my anxious feelings before God Almighty and before others, and, to be honest with my own self. But what it look like for Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday for me to have aids or instruments, exercises that would help me to like practice my scales like on a piano, and I'm just going to do them over and over and over, but I'm going to do them with others, because ultimately emotional health and the Psalms are a team sport. So what would it look like? Now, obviously you get into the details of like, if my parents aren't Christians, or if my parents are divorced, you get into the weeds and it gets more complicated. But in principle, if the body of Christ is the family of God, then children are never on their own. They would have surrogate spiritual aunts and uncles and grandpas and grandmas who are in on this. Now, it's a life project, obviously, but you could see this as sort of a season of formation that then sets into motion things that become part of the culture of a church, that it becomes completely normal for somebody to cry in public, whether you're a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 25 or a 55-year-old, and nobody ever needs permission or feels the need to apologize, which is, of course, very instinctual for our culture, is for us to apologize every time we cry. But crying is like God-given, and I don't write about it in my book because I ran out of real estate, so I ended up doing research after the book, and I ended up preaching a sermon on like, how do we think about crying as a biological gift, like a physiological gift, a social gift, an emotional gift, a spiritual gift. That is a gift that God gives to us for our health and wholeness and vitality. So I didn't get to do that in the book, but I imagined it sort of as something to be part of this curriculum. So that's a little bit of everything there, but maybe that's gets fodder on the table.
No, I see Lance and I's heads are spinning. So I mean, like in a good way, like this idea, especially when you said practice. I guess what I was wondering, what does that look like? How am I thinking of the work you did? Let's just say on anxiety.
Sure.
How am I to go out and practice that embodiment during the week? What practically does that look like?
Well, okay, I just off the top of my head, because I haven't fully realized this as let's say a curriculum or a spiritual formation, program, as it were. But what I would probably say is that I would say, there, like for my children, I have an 8-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. And it was, I don't know if it's ironic or providential, but the week before I did this workshop, my son was struggling. He had very, very big feelings, and he got really mad at me, like the kind of mad where it's like you're beside yourself. You're so mad and you don't know how to turn it off. And I thought to myself, well, I guess here we go. Let's see if I actually believe what I'm about to preach.
Come on, try it out.
Because it was pushing my own buttons, and my own sort of dysfunctional ways of dealing with things. And I just wanted to shut it down with a strong word. I thought, dadgummit, I can't, because I would lack integrity like 5 days from now when I do this workshop. So God is watching. But also my son is watching, and he knows I preach. He sometimes hears me preach. He knows I teach people about God. So, well, I got to do it. So he started throwing things, which he doesn't ever really do. He started throwing things in his room. And so I thought to myself, okay, what does he need from me? And obviously, whatever he experiences from me, that is projecting onto his idea of God. So he needs space to be able to feel his feelings without, an immediate judgment or direction. So, I mean, this is nothing new to you guys. But so I validated his feelings. And I know that obviously underneath this is this anxiety of, am I good enough? Am I going to be loved? Because it's complicated by the fact that he's adopted. So there's sort of the struggle of every adopted child. And unfortunately, in our case, his birth parents don't want to have a relationship with him. And I know I have other friends who have adopted kids and their birth parents are involved. And that's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. And it's just a sorrow for my wife and me that he doesn't have that. So I know he's old enough. Obviously, we talk about adoption. We make it very normal. But I know it's an underlying current. Am I going to be loved? Am I, safe? So I wanted him to be able to vent and to say all the things, even if there are mean things directed towards me, and not take them personally. Okay, now I'm going to sort of skip the tracks and say, what would I recommend to a parent? I would say it's a combination of making sure there is a space for your child to say, I am anxious without needing to say the words I am anxious. So to be anxious and explosive or whatever that looks like, right? A space for somebody to feel the feelings, because there are no wrong feelings, they're just feelings. Now, then what we do beyond those, that's, I guess, where spiritual formation comes in. And so I would want to help my son know that he can be fully himself with me because God wants him to be that way. So the Lord is our shepherd, and I want my son to experience the Lord as a shepherd who takes care of him. Now, I would probably, after sort of the immediate aftermath of all the feelings, we can process them in a way that is specific to him. But I think what I would tell parents is maybe somewhere in the bedroom or somewhere in the house, you have some of these texts from the Psalms. And again, like maybe it's just, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that's it. Like just for him to be able to every day and every night look somewhere on the wall and to be able to see with his eyes, and then to maybe process with his mind, the Lord is my shepherd. I would also think that there is a specific benefit, and I know Curt Thompson writes about this in some of his writing, just saying it out loud, because when you say it out loud, it's helping to rewrite the code that's in your brain that's kind of running an invisible, sort of software that says, I'm actually not going to be okay, and the Lord is not my shepherd. He won't take care of me, so I have to take care of myself. So I think there'd be benefit to sing it out loud. That could be at bedtime. That could be in the morning. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Just say that prayer. And then like a third sort of part of this exercise is that you would hear somebody else say it to you. The Lord is your shepherd. He wants to take care of you. I want to be a part of how you experience the Lord's shepherd. That
mirror experience.
Right. And then probably some other kind of tool sort of in the toolbox, so that when you find yourself, like all kinds of obviously grades of anxiety, low grade to high grade, if it's a low grade anxiety, that you have some spiritual practice or technique or whatever you want to call it, to be able to say, okay, I'm starting to feel anxious. God made my body good, and part of the gift of this body is to help regulate me through breathing, right? Nothing that you guys don't know, but breathing is not a weird thing. It's a very normal thing. So I'm going to start breathing. So how would you help kids just practice breathing as a normal and not a weird thing? I'm not messed up, so therefore I have to have breathing techniques, but breathing is just a really good thing. Breathing, is it walking? Is it sitting? Whatever other things your body needs to do. Is it being outside? Because obviously creation is a very regulating thing by God's good design, because I'm a biological organism. I am intrinsically connected to creation. So creation has the capacity through the elements and through creatures to regulate me. So what kind of bodily thing could you do? For me, it is going for a walk. So early on in our marriage, my wife really needed me to tell her in the moment all the right things. And I became very exasperated with that because I felt incapable of in the moment telling her. And so she felt unloved and I felt unseen. So it just kept spinning around. And eventually I learned enough to tell her. And then she learned me enough to know that it was okay. I was like, just give me 5 minutes, 10 minutes to go for a walk. I'm just going to walk down the block and back because I just need to cool the system down. and then I will come back. And so I think for kids with anxiety, it's like, what's helpful to you? Is it you want to run? You want to play? You want to bounce on the trampoline? You want to just sit? But something with your body, in addition to like breathing, in addition to like thinking and saying out loud, these kinds of things, in addition to hearing with your ears the voice of somebody who is a primary caregiver in your life, who is representing God to you. All these things obviously are multisensory, and over time would hopefully not prevent you from being anxious, but when you're anxious, to handle it in life-giving ways, in real time.
Dude, could we have talked about restoration therapy without talking about restoration therapy right there? I mean, we got mindfulness, we got unloved, unknown,
safe, saying it out loud. practice.
Right, sometimes it's up too high, so we need off ramps.
Hey, I believe it, brothers. I don't always do it, but I believe it.
Oh, you too? That's why we have to confess. That's why we need community.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. Hey, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lance and I were just looking at each other like, boom, boom. Yeah. It's I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm aware of time.
It's okay.
Here.
I'm fine. You guys keep going.
Well, I think we'll go to like noon because I'm going to hop into a therapy session, but
yeah, we're hot. We're hot on the healing pathways today.
Yeah. Lance, what do you, any questions or thoughts? I mean, there's so much there, and we'll obviously have to have him back on at some point if he lets us, but
yeah, seriously.
What do you,
I think what we're seeing here is some healthy ways to think about integration in a therapeutic methodology. I think if you are listening to what David's saying here, is what we're discovering is this stuff that we're doing in our therapeutic world, when it comes to like naming our pain, saying it aloud, saying the truth, and how we're going to act differently, walking into the new self where we're rehumanized. I think what we're hearing from David and what you see throughout all of his work is it pairs so well for helping us to step into the fullness of who God's calling us to be as we try and move towards the way. And I think for some of us, like we struggle, like, how do I make RT work? Like how does it marry with faith? What does it look like? And I think David just modeled that over and over again on how restoration therapy works really well from a faith perspective. I wish we had a little bit more time today, but I think I'm really just gelled up. We gotta get the DT out here and do some fun work with him. So I want to like video of him in the classroom, as he's, I
don't sit still. I teach a lot online, but every once in a while I get to teach in person, and I try to get my students doing things. I'll just say like maybe a couple of things. I'm teaching a class right now on the Psalms, and the first assignment, week 1, is to read the whole Psalter, the whole book of Psalms, if not in one sitting, as much as possible, in a handful of sittings, and then write a reflection on it. And I'm not surprised, but it is always something that catches my attention, how many students who have not been raised in a tradition, who have had any sort of regular usage of the Psalms, are either taken aback or slightly upset by how visceral the language is. Yeah. By how raw, it is, and how seemingly irreverent it is. And like, can we really say that? Can we say that to God? Can we say it in prayer? Can we say it in corporate worship? And the answer in this course is yes, and obviously, wisely, and with great care. But it is something that I am hopeful that by the end of this course, not only are these all this landscape, right? The psychological landscape, not just the spiritual of the Psalms, becomes normal. But the goal of the course for me, like what's my pedagogical goal? I don't really want you to know a lot of stuff, because you can do that with my Old Testament scholar who teaches on the Psalms. But I'm wanting to give you an entire packet of resources that then you can turn around and ready to wear it within your own community or congregation, because I don't want what we're talking about here to be special and abnormal. I want it to be completely normal, but it does require like a long-term recultivation of a community's sort of habits and instincts and what it perceives to be, a regular way of being a Christian in the world. So my hope, over the years, I'll tell you this. I know we're running out of time. I have a student who lives, I think, somewhere in Southern California. Her name is Michelle. And she took my Psalms class 3 years ago, but she wrote me a month or so ago, and she left me this long voicemail message, because one of the assignments I give to them is they have to work with Psalm 149 from beginning to end. They get tired of it about midway through, and I just keep telling them, hang in there. But sort of 3/4 of the way of Psalm 149, you get this imprecatory curse language, pretty harsh language, and students at first recoil. They don't like it, because it's just like, wait, why is it showing up in all this hallelujah stuff? But by the end of it, they've spent 10 weeks in Psalm 149 specifically, and they have to memorize it and recite it to me over Zoom. And a lot of people have not memorized anything since they were 8 years old in Awanas or whatever it was that they did. And she writes me 3 years later, and she's like, look, I just want you to know that while I was frustrated with Psalm 149 for so much of class, eventually I figured out what you were trying to do, and I'm so glad you forced us to memorize it, because it has been such a regulating help to me while I go on my runs. And I live in a community, where what's going on politically is just fracturing and creating all kinds of terrible relational, communal things to happen. And I find myself overwhelmed. So on my run, I stop in this one place by a tree that overlooks a cemetery, and I say out loud Psalm 149 just to remind myself of what is really true about, how God would have this world turn out. And so it's just really encouraging to me to, I don't get that very often, but for somebody who was forced to memorize 3 years later, she still, God bless her, remembered, and now sort of a psychological, spiritual aid to help her kind of stay, in a healthy place.
So great. I mean, it's literally the instrument of learning the scale. Like once you know the scale on the piano or the guitar or whatever it may be, you know exactly where to go. Right. And what you're doing is you're doing the scales of the heart right there helping them to learn how to self-regulate. And that for us, I think is the huge goal, man. So good. Can we have more time with David?
I'd be happy to.
We really appreciate you coming on. And, I live in Texas, Lance is in Southern California. We're doing a lot of stuff with the RT community. So don't be surprised if we hit you up, for some type of collaboration.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I would love
RT and DT.
Yeah.
Hey, sign me up.
Thanks for taking the time. And everyone who's listening knows the drill. We'll have all the show notes.
Okay.
On Spotify and Apple and our Substack and YouTube. We'll all go out with all the links to the different things and books we've talked about, all the different links for David and his work and his website. And so if you want to connect with him, you can check him out online. It's good to follow on Instagram if you're on Instagram, so check that out. Dave, thanks for I'm getting really informal here. Dr. Taylor.
No. Please call me David.
Thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
God bless you, brother.
Yeah.
Take care.